Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And now, here are your hosts, Scott and Jesse from CompassKnox.com.
To Compass Points, the weekly podcast where we talk about Knoxville government, politics, news, education, business, really anything that gets our attention. I am Jesse Mayshark, co-founder and co-publisher of Compass at CompassKnox.com, joined as always by Scott Barker, co-founder and co-publisher of Compass. How are you doing today, Scott?
I'm doing just fine, Jesse. We had a great week last week. As we pointed out in the newsletter, it was one of my favorite sports heroes, Joe Namath's 80th birthday last week.
Happy birthday, Broadway Joe.
Absolutely.
And, you know, most people, like me, for example, think of him as a New York Jet because that was where he had his, you know, sort of dramatic success. But I know for you, it goes deeper than that.
He was a 3-year starter at Alabama, with the greatest quarterbacks in Alabama history.
Playing for one of the greatest coaches ever.
One of the greatest coaches ever. I would have said the greatest until now. Another Alabama coach is probably the greatest. But anyway, one of the things that's kind of interesting, and I saw a lot of this on social media, was there were a lot of posts about Joe Namath that popped up in my news feed, and they all talked about him being with the Jets and how he was he wasn't that great of an athlete because he couldn't move around. The man was amazing when he was at Alabama. If you could ever get a chance to look at, you ever care to, but get a chance to see some video of him when he played, he could run like a gazelle before he hurt his knee. It was really a shame that was what happened to his career, but he still had a great pro career. So
right.
So anyway, like you said, happy birthday, Broadway Joe, and I hope all the people out there who bleed big orange will forgive me for that. So.
Yes, if we haven't lost all of our Vol fan listeners already,
I have a lot of respect for the University of Tennessee. I actually went to the University of Tennessee. That's all okay, but had family ties to Alabama. So
understood. Well, we do have some things to talk about this week. We have an interview coming up with Vice Mayor Andrew Roberto, Knoxville Vice Mayor, City Council member. I'm going to talk to him about the city budget vote and also about everything that City Council and city government went through this year with the legislature, the kind of preemption of local control that we saw continuing on several issues. We're going to talk about another state law taking effect, changes in the regulation of hemp and especially hemp-derived THC cannabis products. Another state law. So this is, it's interesting. This is the time of year. We spent the last several months talking about what the legislature was doing. Now the things that passed the legislature are coming into effect. And so we're talking about the actual impact of those on the ground. Another one is the impact on Knoxville's Police Advisory and Review Committee, their sort of civilian oversight board. And we're going to start it all off with what is some breaking news this Friday morning when we are taping this about a budget deal between County Mayor Glenn Jacobs and Sheriff Tom Spangler. Scott, we've talked about this a lot in the last couple of months, this kind of standoff, I guess you could say there was over the county budget. Mayor Jacobs had proposed a county budget that included an 8% raise for sheriff's deputies and jailers, assuming the sheriff was willing to give up some vacant budgeted positions. Sheriff Spangler was pushing for a 30% raise and had been threatening really for the last several months to actually take this to court, to file an adversarial salary suit, which is something the sheriff can do under state law, where he would have basically tried to make a case to a judge that the county is not providing me with adequate resources, especially the sheriff says that the salary levels that he's been able to offer are not sufficient for him to recruit and fill those vacant positions that he has, especially at the jail, but also in the patrol division. And so that was kind of the looming question here. Were we going to go to court? Has not happened before. That's not something we've seen before. And it's not something we're going to see this year either, as it turns out. So the county commission is actually meeting this Monday to approve the budget, but they're going to be voting on a slightly different budget than the one that Mayor Jacobs presented at the beginning of May, because the mayor and the sheriff came to an agreement. And basically what this does is it meets the mayor's most important objective, which is it does not require a tax increase. Always
the most important thing for Mayor Jacobs.
Yes, that is his. There was no way he was going to propose a tax increase. And it doesn't give Spangler everything that he wanted, but it gives him a fair amount. So what this deal that they announced does is give a 12% raise to patrol officers. Those are deputies at the rank of captain and below. So that'll give them a nice bump, and a 27% raise to corrections officers, the people in the jails. Big jump.
Nice bump.
Yeah, and that's going to take the starting... so everybody at the rank of captain and below will get those increases, but what that's going to do to the starting salaries is it's going to raise starting salary for patrol positions to $51,100, a pretty big jump from the approximately $46,000 that they're at now. Will actually take them above Knoxville Police Department starting pay, which is something the county always looks at, because that's one of the local agencies that they say they lose people to because of salary. And for jailers, it's going to take their starting pay from about $39,000 to $50,000. That's a big jump, especially when you consider that you don't even have to have a college degree to be a corrections officer in Knox County. So you can have a high school diploma, and if you pass, you do have to meet certain standards and so forth. But you can walk right into the jail, start out making $50,000. That's more than the starting pay for Knox County teachers. So it's a pretty decent salary. It's going to make Knox County the second highest paid department in the state, in both of the second highest starting salary statewide for corrections officers, second highest in East Tennessee, I think, for patrol officers. And we will have full coverage and explanation of all of this in Monday's Compass report. Of course, this just came out today. But overall, you have to say, because Sheriff Spangler could have just accepted the 8% raise. Oh, and the other thing is, the sheriff is giving up 29 vacant positions. He had initially offered to give up 58 vacant positions if he got the full 30% raise. So he's giving up half of those vacant budgeted positions, but getting, half or more of what he was looking for. I think you have to say, now, obviously Jacobs can call this a win because he gets to say he supports law enforcement and he doesn't have to raise taxes. But this is a pretty big win for Spangler to kind of be willing to, really stand up to the mayor.
Yeah, and when, in addition to the positions that will go away, so that funding for those positions will go away. How else are they going to be able to fund this? Is there going to be are there going to be any more sources that are of funding, either cuts in other places, or what else is going to be needed?
Yeah, so it's a little bit of a complex package, as you could expect, with sort of county finances moving numbers around here and there. Their estimate of the first year cost of this is going to be, it's going to add close to $4 million to the budget, little under $4 million for the first year of it, which they can accommodate essentially within their fund balance. Their bigger concern with these raises always was what the impact was going to be on the pension plan. So there's a very generous sheriff's pension plan that is closed. It's been closed since 2014. Nobody new has been added to it, but there's still about 350 people working for the sheriff's office who are on that plan. And so any raises that they get are going to affect their long-term pension payout because your pension is based on your salary level. And that was the biggest concern that people in the county finance department had with, say a 30% raise. If you added that to people's pension amounts, it pushes that cost out to a very high number once you get 20 years out. So one thing they're doing is they can handle the first year's cost. That's not really a big problem within the budget. But what they're doing to address that longer term issue with the pensions is they're saying that for the people who are in that plan, which is, again, it's a defined limited number that it's going to be subtracted from year over year as people retire. Any salary increases they get between now and when they retire, the maximum that can be added to their pensionable amount per year is 3%. So if you get a 4% raise, only 3% of that counts toward your pension. If you get a 12% raise like they're proposing to get this year, only 3% of that counts toward your pension. So Chris Caldwell, county finance director, says in the longer term, that actually saves the county an estimated $19 million over the next 20 years on the pension costs. And so that's one concrete thing they're doing to kind of control the impact of this. Now, they have some other proposals that are going to have to be separately approved. One is adding a 10% booking and processing fee for people who are booked and processed at the county jail. This may not be super popular with, say, the public defender's office. I haven't contacted them about it yet, but I'm going to, because this is basically going to be putting part of the cost of this on people who are actually arrested, who often don't have that. Now, it's only $10, but a lot of times these are people who are indigent to start with, so that could be anyway. That would have to be approved by county commission. That's one thing they're talking about. They're also talking about looking for help from the state legislature to increase the amount that the county receives from the state for state prisoners who are held in county jails awaiting transportation to state facilities and prisons. This has been an ongoing issue. The state is supposed to come and get those people relatively quickly, but sometimes they're sitting in the county jails for months. And right now the state is only reimbursing the county at $41 a day for those. The county says it actually costs them about $83 a day to keep people. So they're going to look for help from the legislature with that. So that's one of that's not counted in the budget numbers they're presenting now. They can't count it because it doesn't exist, but it is one of the ways that they say they are going to try and hope to also kind of ameliorate the long-term impact of this. But the short-term answer is they can accommodate this in the budget without a tax increase, without having to cut anything apart from those 29 positions that they're taking away. That's going to cover about $1.3 million or so. So they're kind of stitching together all those little bits and pieces, and they say that the numbers work.
Well, it'll be interesting. Yeah, you're right. There's always these little pieces here and there that have to fit together. It seems like there's very, very seldom is there just kind of a clean funding thing. Like, well, last year the city council passed the property tax increase. It was pretty seamless because just about most of the funds went to. Now and further out will be going toward the increase in salaries that they gave city employees. But usually they're cobbling together things just like this in order to get certain projects and certain initiatives funded. So
yeah, and those of us who watch these budgets closely know that government budgets can be a little bit amorphous. They do have there's a bottom line, like here's our budgeted amount, but there's always that sort of reserve amount, the fund balance. And, they try to budget conservatively. And so that at the end of the year, they have typically more money left than they expected. And that's why you often see sort of year-end budget adjustments and so forth, where they can, now pay for some things they've been waiting for and so forth. But this deal, the fact that they were able to put this deal together with really sizable increases and no salary increases and no tax increase, tells you sort of exactly how much play there is in all of these budget amounts.
Yeah, and then they did it fairly quickly.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they started the budget, putting together the budget months and months ago, and then just in the last few weeks were able to cobble together this. So they were able to move quickly, and like you said, it's probably one of the big factors is they had enough cash, that they were holding back in case they needed to spend more, and they've decided they need to spend more.
Right, exactly. And the one thing it means for us in the media is we do not get to see this potential court case play out, which I was frankly pretty interested to see how that was going to work, what the legal arguments would be, what questions about it the judge might have, and so forth. But we're not going to get to see that this year. And given the salary levels that this is pushing the sheriff's office to, I'm guessing we're not going to get to see that in future years either, at least in the near future. So
I don't know why they didn't do that, because it's all about us.
Yeah, I know. It would have given us something to write about over the summer. Yeah. Anyway, all right, let's talk about a couple of state laws that are now coming into effect. These are laws that were passed by the legislature in this session. We had one affecting the Police Advisory and Review Committee for the city of Knoxville. This was, as we've discussed this before, but it was really aimed at community oversight boards in Nashville and Memphis, which the law basically did away with entirely. And mostly this law really used the existing Knoxville model statewide, but it did have a couple of little pinches in the authority of our own park committee as well. And you went to a meeting where Park talked about this.
Yeah, one of the things about this was, like you said, this was aimed at Nashville and Memphis, who are the biggest targets when it comes to legislative preemption on local governments. And Nashville and Memphis both have police oversight boards. Theirs are different from Knoxville's. Theirs are people are named from the community. I mean, as the mayor doesn't appoint all of the members as the mayor does in Knoxville, and they have pretty independent investigative powers and all that. And that's the sticking point, is this idea that the idea that civilians should be able to investigate police, is the police who are supposed to police them is doesn't fly in some corners of the state. So what they did is they took Knoxville's ordinance and Park, the Police Advisory and Review Committee in Knoxville, was created by ordinance. It outlines what their powers are. They took Knoxville's ordinance and basically wrote the bill to mirror it. Elaine Davis, who's Republican state rep from here in Knox County, was the House sponsor of that. She was the one who really pushed it. Now, one of the things they told the city government was, don't worry about it. Knoxville's going to be held harmless. We're using you as a model. Well, there was an amendment that was added to it, and it rewrote parts of the bill. And when it rewrote parts of the bill, it kind of did affect Knoxville. The primary thrust of the bill was to reduce the independent investigative authority of oversight boards. So Park does it two ways. First, on the front end, where they kind of screen complaints and minor complaints that the executive director of Park deems aren't serious enough to go on to the internal affairs investigators with KPD. They can just resolve with themselves. And usually these are courtesy things, or sometimes failure to investigate some things that are just kind of minor incidents that people report. The new state law, the city ordinance specifically gives the executive director that authority. The state law does not. Now, Ron Mills, who's the deputy law director who handles most of the law enforcement work in the law department for the city said that that doesn't mean that Parks executive director can't do that. Just it's silent on it, so that they're going to keep doing that, and that does keep a lot of complaints from going through to the internal affairs investigators that would otherwise take up their time and don't really involve real departmental misconduct or police misconduct. On the other side, there's at the back end, Park had the authority if because they review internal affairs investigations, if they reviewed them and they weren't incomplete, or they viewed them as incomplete, they could ask the police department to provide more information. If they were still not satisfied, Park could investigate on their own. That authority is removed. And that authority is, of course, that was the only real true investigative authority Park had. At the front end, it's just kind of a filter. On the back end, it would be more substantive. However, in the 25 years Park has existed, they've never used that authority. So it's really while they did have that, they do have that, or did have the authority. July 1st is when this law takes effect. They won't moving forward, but then they haven't used it anyway. So it's they really Jared Kroom is the incoming Park chair. He's been on Park for 6 years, so he knows how it works. And Ron Mills both said, hey, it's kind of we don't do it anyway, so it's not really going to affect us. One other measure that was changed that will that it could affect in the future is, in Knoxville, the mayor appoints members to the park, and under the state law, that can still happen. That's still going to happen, but you can't have, it has to have 7 members, and you can't have more than 2 from one particular district.
Council district. Mm-hmm.
So, whereas in Knoxville now, you could have, 3 from one district and 2 from another district and a couple more from other districts, and some districts not have anybody on there, and that's okay. In the future, you pretty much have to have one, and because Knoxville has 6 districts, pretty much have to have 1 from each district, and then one district has a second member. Currently, the way the makeup is, they're already there. They only have only have one district that has more than 1 member, and so that's fine. But in the future, when mayors make appointments, they're going to have to pay attention to where the people they want to appoint live, and if there's there's a district that has 2 members already, an opening comes up, then they have to fill it from a district that doesn't have a member.
Mm-hmm. Well, and so it sounds like because the biggest potential impact of this from a practical standpoint, since as you say, that investigative power at the back end really hasn't been used, the biggest potential impact would have been at the front end, but the city is kind of saying that, well, just because the state explicitly removed the part of the city ordinance that says, yes, they can do initial, I guess investigation's not the right word, but as you say, filtering at the front end, just because that line was taken out doesn't mean they can't do it, and they're going to do it anyway. And probably nobody will complain. Probably
not. I mean, they're looking at that as, well, they didn't bar it, so we're going to do it. Of course, I don't think the way it's written actually barred it on the back end either, but
it just took out the explicit authorization.
But they're going to move forward on the front end filtering process as they always have. It's going to be status quo moving forward, and and also this doesn't affect the agreement that KPD and Park came to earlier this year about how they're going to interact. One of the things that did is it gave Park much more access to KPD data and information regarding police misconduct and in internal affairs investigations. And Park is going to be able to have a representative sit in on disciplinary hearings, which they haven't been able to do in the past. And so there's really going to be more interaction and more information available to Park before the end of the investigation and afterwards when they review, because that's the big thing Park does is review internal affairs investigations. They'll be able to review those with more information and more data.
Right. Well, an interesting move by the state, regardless, to basically set limits on how much oversight local communities are able to have over their own police departments.
Yeah.
The Knoxville Police Department is funded by taxpayers of the city of Knoxville. It was created by the city of Knoxville. It is entirely an instrument of the people of the city of Knoxville.
And they only have jurisdiction over the Knoxville Police Department. They don't have jurisdiction over UT Police Department, Knox County Sheriff's Office, Highway Patrol, TBI.
Right.
Anybody.
But this is still the state coming in and saying, basically, we don't want you local taxpayers. We want to put limits on how much oversight you as local taxpayers have over your own police department.
Right.
That is the position the state is taking. Okay, let's look at another state law. We have talked about this in the past as well, this very interesting, weird situation we have with cannabis, which is that, long story short, things made from hemp are legal in Tennessee. Things made from marijuana are not legal in Tennessee. The difference between hemp and marijuana is actually pretty small. It's basically the same plant. We're talking about cannabis, and the legal distinction, hemp are cannabis plants that have a naturally occurring concentration or presence of THC, which is the psychoactive compound or the primary one in marijuana. If it has a concentration of 0.3% or less of THC in that plant when it grows, that's hemp. If it's more than 0.3%, that's marijuana. And what has happened since hemp specifically was legalized at the national level by the 2018 Farm Bill, there's been an explosion in the hemp industry, in the cannabis industry. The initial conversations about this was, well, people are going to use it for all sorts of industrial purposes and blah, 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 blah. And it has been used for a lot of things. Of course, they derive CBD from it, which is another compound that's in cannabis that is not psychoactive, does not get you high, does seem to have various kinds of physical effects. Some people say therapeutic effects. Some people say it helps them sleep. Science and data on all of that is fairly murky, but there are people who swear by it. But regardless, it's something that has been now sold for several years without anybody making too big a deal out of it. But just in the last few years, hemp producers and processors basically figured out a way to take the small amounts of various forms of THC. You'll hear people talk about Delta 8, and what that refers to is an isomer of Delta 9, which is the which is the form of THC that you find in marijuana. Delta 8 is slightly molecularly different. Molecularly is a hard word to say on the radio. Or on a podcast. I don't recommend it. But they've found ways to concentrate that presence of these other forms of THC, Delta 8, Delta 10, and so forth, into distillates essentially that are strong enough to be psychoactive, and then they can use that to make gummies, to make smokable products, usually by spraying it on the hemp plants, which if you smoke the hemp flowers by themselves, they're not going to get you high. If you smoke a hemp flower that's been sprayed with Delta 8, it will. And all of that has been legal, and it's kind of grown up without any real regulations around it. It's just anything that is made from hemp is legal, and you can just sell it at a store, and that's what people have been doing. And so there was an initial attempt last year by the state legislature to, ban Delta 8 and say, we got to close this loophole. But the reality is the industry was already well enough established that it was just too big to stop, too much money already changing hands there. And so this year they came back, and one of the sponsors of this bill was our own state senator, Richard Briggs from Knoxville. He was one of the ones who initially was trying to ban Delta-8, and he just kind of realized, well, that's not going to work. And so he's a doctor, as most people probably know. He's a surgeon, and his primary concerns are around these kinds of things, really have to do with health. And so his feeling was, well, if this is going to be legal, let's at least regulate it. Because the way it was, there weren't any rules. People could call things Delta-8 or whatever, and you didn't have any way as a consumer of knowing what was really in it. And so this law that passed puts in a whole bunch of restrictions on processors and manufacturers. They're going to be inspected by the State Department of Agriculture, make sure all their facilities meet all of these standards, that the products they're producing don't, only have the things that they say that are in them, and don't have a bunch of other chemical impurities that can come from that process itself. So they're providing, and then each product is going to have to be labeled, saying what it is, where it comes from, so people will be able to know, like, oh, this hemp was grown in, Union County, and it was processed here, and here's what's in it. And then on the retail side, because of course we've had several retailers spring up just specializing in selling these cannabis products, but you've also been able to get them at vape shops. Some places like gas stations have just had gummies on the shelf, and there also hasn't been any age restriction until now. So this law puts in, it's kind of treating it like alcohol. You have to be 21 to buy it. People who are selling it at the retail side are going to have to pay for state licenses, $250 a year. The manufacturer is going to have licenses of $500 a year. And they're going to have to ID people, make sure they're over 21, and they're going to charge an extra 6% sales tax on top of the already existing sales tax that they have been paying. All of that is estimated to generate somewhere, about $10 million a year just on the sales taxes, about $1.1 or $2 million a year from the licenses, which will first of all pay for the enforcement of this through the Department of Agriculture, but that is only estimated to cost maybe $1.5 million a year or so. So the state is looking at a conservative estimate of about $10 million a year in new revenue that they expect is going to come in from this. So we wrote about this week. You can find it on our website if you're a subscriber. If you're not a subscriber, good time to become one, especially if you're interested in hemp and THC and what all this means. Kind of lays it all out. We talked to local retailer and the Tennessee Growers Coalition, which is the new but already fairly influential, as we have seen, a group that represents cannabis growers, manufacturers, processors, and retailers in Tennessee. And we talked to Briggs himself about it. And, one of the interesting things about this that everybody recognizes, including Briggs, is that for the first time, this is creating a regulatory structure for the production and distribution of consumable cannabis in Tennessee. Right now, that's only for hemp products. But, I asked Briggs, is this a structure that could also be used in the future for, say, medical marijuana or for just marijuana overall? And he kind of laughed and was like, I should just say no comment, but because he's not in favor of marijuana legalization overall. But he said, well, yes, like obviously you're already dealing with people who are already growing, processing everything, these plants that are functionally almost identical to marijuana. Yeah. So right, what we're creating here is something that could be used in the future to also be a platform for marijuana.
Yeah, I mean, essentially the bottom line is hemp manufacturers can create a product, the end product, that is as strong or possibly even stronger than a bud you get from your dealer down the street,
your black market sources.
Your black market sources, yes. But essentially that can happen, and it's all legal and taxed and regulated, like you said, like alcohol.
Yep.
But the product that you can buy is just as potent as the marijuana you get on the streets.
If you go onto marijuana forums online, you'll find a lot of discussion and debate about, is Delta 8 as good? Is Delta 10 as good? People kind of and of course there's lots of different strains. People who are super into marijuana are like people who are super into wine. There's all these different strains and hybrids and mixtures they like and whatever. And so, you will find people saying they don't think it's quite the same or whatever, but like everybody basically acknowledges that yes, this is an intoxicating cannabis derived substance that has a lot and as with any cannabis substance, even if people will talk about Delta 8 as being less potent than Delta 9, marijuana, but as with any cannabis product, and anybody who maybe experimented a little too much in their younger days can probably attest to this. The more of it you take, the higher you will get. Yeah. And so if that first dose of Delta 8 isn't doing it for you, if you take a second dose of it, another gummy or whatever, you can get pretty intoxicated off of this stuff. And you will still be subject to, if you are high on Delta 8 and you get pulled over by a cop and you're clearly intoxicated, you're still going to be ticketed.
Yeah.
Like that's not legal. Just like alcohol, that's not legal just because the substance itself is legal. And another point Briggs made is that like for employers who drug test, now this will still show up on a drug test. It'll look like THC in a drug test. And again, an employer can tell you, no THC use by any of our employees, and if that shows up in a screen, the fact that you bought it legally, consumed it legally, is not going to protect you from getting fired. Right. So it's not some sort of like get out of jail free card,
right?
But it does create basically a legal cannabis, a legal recreational cannabis market in Tennessee. That's what we have now. And we also have actually an expert in the room here that we should maybe take advantage of. Seth Barber, our producer, in addition to being a fine podcast producer, is also a co-owner and proprietor of some retail outlets here that traffic in some of these substances. And Seth, I'm curious.
Traffic is a little pejorative, isn't it?
It's a tough choice of words there. I own eBay Lounge. We have 3 locations all around town. And we've been messing around on this for a good little bit as the industry's moved around. And so like, there is part of me that like, I appreciate the premise that now I don't have to be like, it's inevitable that somebody asks the question, is this legal? It's like, yes, it's legal. Well, at least up until July 1st, it was not illegal, I guess is always the way I always try to put it. No, it's not illegal.
Little bit of a gray area.
Right. It was a little bit of it was, and it's one of those questions on the philosophical nature of government, how it's supposed to work. It's like, it's are they telling us what we're allowed to do or what we're not allowed to do? And depending on how you want to read into what the government and the legal system is how it was. And so anyway, we've been at it for a long time. It's a very popular product for us. It kind of scares me a little bit because we've almost turned more into a dispensary than a vape shop. We were always a vape shop first, but we expanded into it and it's done very, very well for us. The thing to me, as somebody in the industry reading through this, there's a couple issues that I have with it. One, you have a Republican adding taxes and regulation, which is usually, not the same hand of people that do that kind of thing. But 2, the deep in one of the amendments, there was one part that jumped out at me that I find problematic. And again, this is a philosophical thing for me more than it is a professional issue. The idea that you have to prove to the police that this is a legal product. Deep down in it, it says, keep your packaging, because if you get pulled over, as the example was, you're still going to get a DWI, I guess is what they're going to call it. But if they want to take you in for possession, they can take you in for possession if you don't have the original packaging. Now, at least as I understood the laws and stuff like that, it was always supposed to be the police's responsibility to show that you have done a criminal act, not your responsibility to prove to them that you haven't. And so that's one of the things way down in that bill that not a lot of people have talked about that struck me as very odd.
Right. And so that's a good consumer tip there. If you're buying any of this, you might want to hold on to that wrapper.
Right. And by definition of the law, you have to. If you have an interaction, that you have to have it in your possession to show the police or whomever that this is a legal product that you bought here. Well, maybe not bought here, but bought at a store that has the proper this, that, and the other.
Yeah, that was the fact that it's so explicit in the law is a little different. But the police have always had probable cause reasons to do that. I mean, if you've got a white powdery substance in a little bag in your car when they pull you over, then they'll just pretty much automatically
Right.
assume that's probable cause for them to think that, and if it turns out to be flour or sugar or something like that, then I don't know why you would have a baggie of flour in your car, but you could. Then, then they don't have a basis to actually charge you, but they did probable cause to arrest. And so, you still aren't under the burden to prove that that's flour. That's
right.
Something that'll come out. It's not you are not required to prove your innocence. So
yeah, and I asked both the Knoxville Police Department and the Sheriff's Office about how this law was going to affect their enforcement, because there's lots of things. One, for example, is that the smell of marijuana, which is a fairly strong smell, for decades,
and a unique smell,
for decades has been used as one of the things that police can use when they're explaining, like, why did you go and knock on the door? Well, because there was a strong odor of marijuana. Or when the driver rolled down their window, I could smell marijuana. Like, that's one of those indicators that they use for investigation. And now, of course, you could be smoking something completely legal that does smell basically the same, and they can, in fact, still use that, at least as a grounds, to ask you, well, what is that? Where, in addition to first ascertaining if you're intoxicated and maybe doing something you shouldn't be while you're intoxicated, like driving, but then also, what is this substance? Where did it come from? And that is where, as Seth says, the law puts that burden on the consumer for sure. The other part of it is that local law enforcement is, as with our alcohol laws, local law enforcement is going to be responsible for doing a lot of the retail side enforcement. So we will probably see KPD, KCSO doing the same kind of, sting operations on retailers. Something for you to be aware of, Seth.
Oh, well, like, that was something I wanted to bring up too. It's like, all the stuff that is content in this law is stuff we've been doing from the beginning. We've always required labs from our vendors. We've always been 21 and up, even though it wasn't required to do so, but that was just always how we have done it. And I think most retailers, and like Dr. Jane said in the article as well, most retailers have been doing it this way anyway. Most manufacturers have been doing it this way anyway. For most of the players that are already here, that you've already dealt with, nothing changes except you pay more for the product at the end of the day, and then we pay extra license fees and stuff like that.
Right.
And now I guess there is a technical criminal element if we do sell underage.
And the executive director of the Growers Coalition made that same point, that most of their members, they pushed for this law. They were in favor of it. Most of their members, retailers, are already doing this. Where they expect it'll kind of thin out the market a little bit is the sketchy stuff on the gas station shelves that maybe came from China and maybe you don't even know what's in it. Like, a lot of that stuff's going to go away. Your average interstate gas station may not even pay the $250 to get the license to sell it. So, it'll probably concentrate the market a little more in the more reputable retailers like yourself, Seth.
Well, convenience stores are moving to wine anyway.
Right. I know, that's right. You can get wine down at Casey's.
Yeah.
So forth. Okay. So those are the state laws we were going to talk about. Circling back to local budgets, we talked about the county budget a little bit earlier. City Council had its official vote on Mayor India Kincannon's proposed budget this past week, which went through relatively easily, Scott, but also engendered some conversation about sort of a separate but related issue.
Yeah, the budget as proposed was $432.9 million. Nothing extraordinary in it, nothing really controversial. When it was one of the first items to come up at last week's city council meeting, there was some discussion about housing, especially affordable housing, how to fund that. But I mean, the city's putting in $7.5 million of its own money. Also, takes advantage of millions of dollars of federal money to support affordable housing. Some council members think they need to do more. So there was some discussion about that, but not enough to derail anything. The budget, this discussion that lasted just a few minutes. The vote was 7-1 we had one member who was Lynn Fugit, who was out of town. But the vote was 7-1. Amelia Parker was the only dissenter on that. And that pretty much went through. However, Parker also had a proposal later to create and this would have had an impact on the budget in certain situations. Well, could still have an impact on the budget down the road. She wanted to create a task force to come up with a pilot program for an alternative response team to respond to mental health crises, emergencies in the community. Now, she wanted to fund it with $50,000 that would go to from the fund balance, what we talked about earlier, kind of the cushion, and put it into the city council budget, create this task force, have the task force come up with a pilot program to bring back to council for approval. That prompted about almost 2 hours of discussion beyond that, because it has been and we've talked about it before, and it's been a big thing that currently the city uses what's called a co-responder model, where there's a team, they pair a Knoxville Police Department officer who's been, trained in, de-escalation techniques and that sort of thing, along with a mental health professional from the McNabb Center, and that team will respond to these calls. Now, of course, there are many more of these calls than a team can respond to, and they have enough. They budgeted for 4 teams right now. They're not all filled, but that's because the McNabb Center is shorthanded with mental health professionals. I mean, everybody in that responds to public emergencies, whether it's the private sector with healthcare and with public sector with law enforcement, they're all shorthanded, and McNabb Center is no exception. Anyway, but they're supposed to go. They go in a police vehicle. I believe it's unmarked police vehicle, if I'm not mistaken, but I could be wrong. I haven't actually gone out on a ride along to see how they do things. But anyway, they engage people who are having mental health crises and try to get them help they need without taking them to jail. And the last time we had stats on it, we haven't had an update in a while, several months, that there are very few arrests that occur because of this, and most people do get at least referred to mental health resources as a result of interactions with the co-responder team. But there are many people who, and there's an organization that's formed to advocate for this this alternative response model. That model has an EMT or other kind of medic paired with a mental health professional. So there's no police involvement at all. And the idea there is that the presence of police officers at situations like this exacerbates the situation, that it can escalate things from a purely mental health issue to a criminal issue, and that there's unnecessarily so. And so there's an organization called Healing East Tennessee Emergency Response Team. HEART is the acronym, and they've been advocating for this alternative response model for about 3 years now. And they're the ones who are really pushing for this task force to be formed to come up with this pilot program. They were very explicit they wanted a seat at the table on the task force as well. So this whole idea of this task force, now the $50,000 that Parker had wanted for the task force was just to get the task force started, to get some operating funds for them to, they might have to do some travel to other cities, that sort of thing, or bring in people from other cities that do this alternative response model. And so, there's that money. The pilot program itself, HEART has already kind of worked out one that's going to, require, hiring 3 people, buying a van, it would cost $450,000. That number would need to be ironed out. But I mean, that would be an annual cost, and that's just for one team. So that's now council members are all kind of. This is kind of a weird thing. They're all kind of sympathetic to being in favor of the co-response model or the alternative response model, but they're reluctant. There were several who were reluctant to actually form a task force. Some didn't think it was necessary. Some still don't. Want more information about the nuts and bolts of how it would work. Who would provide the mental health professionals, for example. The McNabb Center has said that they're not comfortable without a police officer in these types of calls. And McNabb Center is kind of the go-to agency for in the field response to mental health crises. So, there are a lot of things a lot of questions about how it would actually work. Would it be a city department? Would it be a nonprofit that contracts with the city? And if so, who would that nonprofit be? Obviously it's not going to be the McNabb Center, or at least at this point, it's not going to be the McNabb Center. Would it be a newly created one? Would it be an existing one? How it would work? Council members. There's some council members who want to have clarity before they start moving down that road. The Heart and its supporters counter with, well, this is what the task force is for. This is why we have the task force, to look at these things and come up with reasons. And they, like I said, they spent an hour and a half, actually closer to 2 hours, discussing this. And then they wound up being that Parker basically saw it was going to be a divided vote and said, well, listen, I'm willing to postpone this for 4 weeks so that everybody can take, all the council members can learn more about it, take a look at it more closely, and we'll come back and vote on it 4 weeks from now. And so that's what they all decided to do. They all voted. So they spent almost 2 hours discussing it. And it was delayed for 4 weeks, but it was an interesting dynamic in that the council members are. I mean, I think a majority of the council members basically came out and said that we like this, but we're not going to vote for it for this task force.
Right. Well, so obviously more discussion to come there, but they've been talking about this for a few years now. The advocates have, and maybe this is one of those things that it just takes a few years to kind of, let people think about it and talk about it and get to a point where there is a comfort level from council members, from the mayor and so forth. But obviously the discussion is still alive. They didn't shut it down. Yeah.
And buy-in from the administration is absolutely, vital to anything like this. The administration says they're open to it. They're not enthusiastic. I think one of the things that and this again goes to the practical end of it, is it costs a lot less to do the co-response model, because you've already got police officers, and they're like KCSO. They've got a lot of unfilled positions, yet they do have police officers assigned to this, so they're already on the budget, so they don't have to hire new police officers to do this. They would have to hire new EMTs. Somebody would have to hire new EMTs. They already have the vehicle. They already have the fuel, which they buy at a discount, bulk discount, and all kinds of. There are all kinds of costs already in place in the co-response model that would have to be new in the alternative response model. So that would be, kind of one of the things that would need to be resolved. As this moves forward, it might be a sticking point moving forward. But the administration's open to it. They're just not enthusiastic about it. So that will be something that, again, by the end of June, we'll know a little bit more.
And also will be interesting to see to what degree it gets picked up by any of the candidates running for office in the city elections this year as a way to, distinguish themselves or whatever.
That's a question we're going to be asking.
And so to talk a little bit more about all of that, the city budget, the alternative response model, and also some of the things the city has been dealing with this year vis-a-vis the state legislature, we have our interview this week with Knoxville Vice Mayor Andrew Roberto. So let's go ahead and go to that tape.
Our guest this week is Vice Mayor Andrew Roberto. He is also a city council member, which is how he gets that seat, and he represents the 2nd District of West Knoxville. Welcome to the podcast, Andrew.
Hey, Scott, welcome. Thank you for having me, and Jesse, appreciate the opportunity. Looking forward to our discussion.
Okay, great. Well, we'll jump right in. This past week, we had the final vote on the budget, the $432.9 million spending plan that ended up getting approved without any kind of amendments or anything. So, what in your mind are the big takeaways from the budget? What does this budget kind of mean in the overall sense?
Well, and I appreciate that question. I think overall, when you're thinking about budgets, it's ultimately a moral document, because there's always a lot of really good ideas, a lot of really good projects, a lot of good things that you can be doing, and you have limited resources, and you have to decide how you're going to allocate those resources. So it's not an easy thing at all. It's not for lack of having really good, things to do that would be good for the community. But I thought that we covered a lot of territory that needed to be covered. I think top of mind is probably affordable housing. Everybody knows what we're dealing with regard to affordability in the city. And I'm really glad that we had almost $7.5 million in total investment in this budget for affordable housing. A good chunk of that is for transforming Western. And, that's really very important, not only as a transformational project in Western, but also it gives us 470 permanent affordable housing units that are really needed. So that increase is really helpful. We saw more support for permanent supportive housing, especially for our veterans, which I thought was really good, and continued investments in the Affordable Rental Housing Fund, which is also really critical. So I think, and that actually came up, if you remember, in the council meeting. I think all of the council members who spoke, or at least most of them who spoke about the budget, all talked about the issue of affordability, and so that's definitely top of mind. One piece of that, which I did mention in the meeting that I was disappointed in, was that the Matrix folks had come up with a plan for how to deal with what's going on from a permitting side in the city and the backlog that we're dealing with. And there were 2 additional spots at plans review and inspection that were requested, and they didn't end up getting funding. But I think that I'm in continued discussions about that, and from the discussion at council, I think you could hear that I think those may eventually be approved. We may see a budget amendment about that. I'm hopeful for that. And I was also very glad to hear that there's discussion about getting an outside firm to look at approvals for what we're dealing with the backlog, because it's very hard to move forward when you can't get unstuck because of all the permitting requests that you've got right now. So I'm very pleased with the discussion on that, and want to continue to look in that direction. If you think about what I just talked about with affordable housing, we do a really good job in our public-private partnerships, which is really what we're talking about with the Affordable Housing Rental Fund. But what we really got to improve on is activating the private sector on building housing, because we need housing in a very bad way, as everyone I think knows. And the city can do what we're doing, and it's great that we're doing what we're doing, and we're leveraging a lot of dollars that otherwise wouldn't be out there for affordability. But we've got to get the private sector involved. And I had mentioned in the meetings at the legislative budget hearing, but then also in the council meeting, just that we need to be using our tools as a city to encourage mixed use development along the corridors, and start that process where we've got a lot of amenities and a lot of access to transportation and things like that, because we really do need additional housing. But
okay, one of the things that happened last week too was, and this was, it could have ended up getting into the budget discussion, but ended up not getting into the budget discussion, was the idea that we spoke about earlier in the podcast on the alternative response team task force proposal. And I wanted to get kind of your take first on the alternative response team concept, and then the idea behind this, of using this task force to come up with a pilot program, and kind of what you would need to hear to convince you to move forward with this project.
Well, I think it's that model, the alternative response model, is a really good idea, and I'm very supportive of it. My public comments have been, very supportive of it. I have been, since council's retreat from 2 years ago, council had decided that they wanted to look at mental health, and realizing that the city has only some of the availability to support programs, wanted to engage with the county and as well as the state. And so we had that first of its kind mental health workshop with our partners from obviously the city, but also county commission and our state delegation. And that was a great discussion. And I think it really showed a lot of interest across multi jurisdictions from county and state and city about dealing with mental health. Since organizing that, I've continued to be in discussions with our providers about it. And this model, the alternative response model, is something I'm very interested in. I think that there are times when we can have we can free up police officers from responses where their response isn't necessary, and having some social workers and an EMT come and address issues that would be better served by them. It's a really good program. So I'm very supportive of it. I think there was an opportunity at the meeting on Tuesday where, with some slight amendments, I think we could have passed a resolution with unanimous support. And so my hope is that, that the efforts will continue with working on what's going on with that particular resolution, so that something can be passed, hopefully unanimously, at a future meeting. And independent of that, I'm going to continue the work I've been doing, in support of, more mental health services in our community, because I think it's another critical need.
I wanted to ask. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Scott.
Go ahead, Jesse.
Well, did you have a follow-up on the alternative response model? Okay. Well, just going in a slightly different direction, another thing you all have been dealing with this year, and it's not a new issue, is the whole question of sort of state preemption of local authority and control. This has been sort of an ongoing thing in various forms for several years, but this year it got especially kind of pitched around the bill that ultimately passed, that is going to restructure Knoxville City Council district elections, a bill on police oversight that is going to require at least some modifications to the operations of park. Apart from the specifics of those issues, I guess, what is your thought? I know council passed a resolution on the election bill. Just kind of what is your thought as a member of city council, as vice mayor, on that balance of when it's appropriate for the state to kind of dictate the operations of local government, and when it's not, or when you would prefer that they take a more hands-off approach?
Well, I'm a big advocate for local government being in the best position to make decisions about local matters. So, in these issues that you just discussed, I always think that it's a much better approach to have local government looking at it. Specifically with regard to the election interference. That was brought by the two sponsors don't even live in the city. Council in another first in March of this year went and had a meeting, and we had a day on the Hill, and we sat down with our partners from the state delegation and had lunch, and that was pretty much the topic of discussion. And I think we had recognized as the council the need for continuing to have good relationships with our state partners, and wanted to continue those efforts. And they had participated in the joint mental health care workshop, which we talked about earlier. So I thought this was a really good thing for us to do. But you're right, Jesse. That topic came up, was pretty much most of the discussion. Ultimately, my opinion is that, if the voters of Knoxville put into place our election system by referendum more than 50 years ago, if they want to change it, then let's have them make that change. Those changes are best made locally, and I think it is a violation of home rule. And I have publicly encouraged and continue to encourage the administration to seek judicial relief, which would mean a difficult decision to file a lawsuit. But I think the rights of our voters in Knoxville have to be protected, and there's no one else to stand up for them but us. So I would, again, strongly recommend that we take that action.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that too. How close do you think the law department is to a decision, and if the administration's law department doesn't decide to do that, is this something that you would consider the council filing a lawsuit without necessarily the administration doing it?
I think it needs to happen. And I also think that throughout the discussion of this, when we had the special called meeting, as well as when the resolution was drafted, there's been broad support among obviously all council because it passed unanimously, but also from the administration. So I think everyone's on the same page on this. I think that the law department has heard the desire to move forward on something here, and I think they are looking at it. And so fortunately there was an amendment, so this doesn't go into effect until 2025. But I think that the sooner we take action, the better, because like I said, there's no one else to do it. It's just the only place the voters are going to get protection from is us.
On a different topic, maybe a happier one, there were some new growth estimates that came out recently from the U.S. Census that suggested that I think the overall total number of new people who moved into Knox County last year was about 7,700, but about 30% of that was within city limits, a couple thousand new residents. And that's on top of, in the 2020 census, you saw the biggest increase in city population in like 50 years. A lot of this is attributed to the redevelopment in and around downtown, growth in sort of multifamily housing, more apartments and condos and so forth. But I guess just overall, what are you hearing from developers? Like, why are we seeing this real surge of interest and activity, both in building new housing within the city and also people wanting to move and be? Most of the growth in Knox County for decades has been outside city limits, but now city limits is also showing that. So what's going on?
Well, as somebody who was, born in the area and raised in the area and went to our public schools, I've seen Knoxville change from when I was little to now. And there was a time where downtown had tumbleweeds going around, and that's not the case anymore. It is vibrant and exciting, and the entire city is really a wonderful place to be, with a lot of great amenities and great quality of life, with access to all the natural resources we have here, the parks we have. There's just a lot going on in Knoxville, and I think the word is out that Knoxville is a great place to live, and we are seeing that. And I think probably over the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to see more of it. And that's why the beginning part of our discussion today was about affordability. We don't have enough housing, and that is not a good place for us to be. It will, if you're on the wrong side of the supply and demand curve, you're going to see really high prices, and we're seeing that. So that's why we really got to address the issues we talked about at the beginning of the discussion, and unplug those backlogs that we've got, and get enough staff in to be reviewing the permits that are coming in, and we've really got to be focused on what council laid the groundwork for, which was mixed use along the corridors, which people want. When I'm out there talking to the community, people want to see that. And we've got to use our incentive tools to start that process. And so far, we haven't really seen much movement on it, but I'm hopeful that we will begin to see that happening here very soon.
Councilman, you also represent West Knoxville, and last Thursday there was an open house that the city sponsored to talk about issues facing West Knoxville and the things that are the projects that are going on there, the initiatives that are affecting West Knoxville. How did that go? Was there a good turnout? And what are the big concerns you heard from your constituents there? I know you hear from your constituents all the time, but what are the concerns that they have out there that might be different from what they are in Fountain City or East Knoxville or South Knoxville?
Well, I mean, it was well attended. It was another good event. I've been to each of the community open houses, as I think Scott, you had been to most of them too. They were all very well attended, and this one involved both the second and the third district. So it was Seema Singh's district as well that was there. A lot of people were very excited about the improvements at Lakeshore Park. There's the new ball fields, the amenities there, the outdoor concert venues. They're planting over 700 new trees. I mean, it's under construction right now, so there's only one of the entrances is open, so it's a little bit of a challenge. But once it's completed, I think that's just going to be an even better facility for all of Knoxville, not just those of us in West Knoxville. That's it's about a $30 million project where you've got about $30 million coming from private donors to go and do these upgrades, which is fantastic. And the city's commitment is $10 million over 5 years. In this present budget, we've got $2 million that went in to the project, but I'm really excited about that. Neighbors are excited about the other renovations to parks at West Hills. They're repaving the tennis and pickleball courts. We've got the bicycle skills training area that's going there. There's a lot of fantastic things going on at West Hills Park as well. Most of what those projects, if you boil them down to, a lot of them are talking about infrastructure and improvements to traffic. So we've got traffic management systems that were being discussed, which I think are very needed and things people are looking forward to. You've got the Greenway expansions, which I'm always a big supporter of. There's between Wesley Road and Golf Club Road, there's additional bicycle and pedestrian areas. So, we're looking at some great things. The challenge with a lot of this pedestrian infrastructure, which I'm a big advocate of, is, we just want to have a more walkable city. And you hear that when you go out to the neighborhoods. It's very hard to get, there's a lot of needs. It's over $1 billion to do all the sidewalks that have been requested. And, that's not something the city can fund. But we're also, this year we've got, we had only $200,000 in this budget for new sidewalk construction, and that's not going to do much. But we had $1.5 million for new sidewalk construction left over from last year, so we've got $1.75 million. I think I was able to request several years ago getting that up to $2.3 million, but it's challenging, and we need to have, I think, especially looking at sidewalks in the parental responsibility zones around schools. That should be a real priority.
All right. Well, that is probably a good place to wrap up. I will say, speaking of Lakeshore Park, I was lucky enough to be at a little pop-up performance there the other week by Yo-Yo Ma when he was in town. He came and did a little impromptu thing there with local poet R.B. Morris, and he was very taken with the beauty of the park. He was very complimentary of it. So it's Yo-Yo Ma endorsed. Thanks so much for giving us some of your time, Vice Mayor. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Really appreciate it.
All right, we are up to the Q&A segment of the podcast. Every week, or most weeks when we remember to, we go onto our subscriber-only Facebook group, the Compass Colloquy, one of the many amenities available to you as a Compass subscriber. If you want to become a Compass subscriber, you can find out how at CompassKnox.com. So we go into the Compass Colloquy and we ask our readers, hey, is there anything beyond just the weekly headlines that you'd like to hear about on the podcast? This week, one of our readers just wanted to know a little bit about the school system's special education task force. And this is something that we have talked about a little bit on here before, but this is a task force that Superintendent John Ryswick formed, made up largely of parents of special education students, along with some of his key staff and administrators who oversee that side of the school system operations. And it is meeting right now. I mean, probably not like right now while you're listening to this, but it had its first meeting this past week and is going to meet over the course of this month, June, and is supposed to come back to the school board and the superintendent with some recommendations. And this is just one part of it. It's, the most important part, I guess, of this broader process that Ryswick has put in place to really take what he says, what he has promised will be a, good, honest, potentially critical look at the school system's special education operations overall. How do they identify kids who need help? How do they serve them? How do they interact with parents, families, classroom teachers to try to make the accommodations that are agreed to by everybody or that are required by law? And this is something that I think a lot of advocates for children with disabilities have been looking for a long time from Knox County Schools. I have to say I've been covering Knox County Schools on and off, but aware of, let's say, the operations of Knox County Schools since about 1995. Long time now. The entire time that I've been covering the school system, this has been just a consistent issue. This is something that parents of students with special education have come to the school board over and over and over and over again over those years, looking for help, expressing dissatisfaction either with the services that they're getting or the sort of philosophical orientation maybe of school personnel. A lot of times these conflicts come down to the amount that parents want their children to be in regular classroom settings and the amount that school administrators sometimes want them to be in other settings, some kind of, pull-out session or even a full-time special education classroom, which they do have some of. So that's often where those tensions are, is parents pushing for more integration of students with disabilities into regular classrooms, which federal law requires. The federal special education law says that you have to provide the least restrictive setting possible. And a lot of times these disputes and debates come down to sort of, what is actually possible.
Yeah. What is really the least restrictive.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And so that's what, Ryswick came in last year as superintendent. And this is he's kind of been working through a list of things that he promised he was going to take a look at. This is one of them. He said, yes, we're going to take a real look at that. So he's appointed this task force, which has several parents who are advocates, have been strong vocal advocates for children with disabilities, special education students on it, people who have not been shy sometimes about challenging the school system. So, at the front end, it looks like they are sincere that, they put people on that task force, and they've also they have a third-party contractor that's done some sort of focus groups with parents, and actually the school board's going to be getting a report, sort of interim report on some of that this coming week. So that's what's going on with that. It will be very interesting to see how comprehensive those recommendations that come out of it are. On a personal note, I will just say that I have two students. Well, I now have one student in Knox County Schools. And until a couple weeks ago, I had two students in Knox County Schools because, as we mentioned last week, one of them just graduated. My son, who just graduated, actually has had an IEP, an individualized education plan, for students with disabilities. The entire time he's been in Knox County Schools, he has received services of various kinds at various points, occupational therapy, speech therapy, and so forth. By the time he graduated, he was just receiving sort of some extra time on tests and things. His accommodations were pretty low level by the time he graduated. And my own experience with it, I have to say, was generally positive. Now, yes, we had to go in there every year and advocate for him and so forth, but we mostly found fairly accommodating teachers, principals, and so forth. However, our accommodations that we were looking for were mostly pretty minor. Fortunately, his disabilities were not that severe and got better over time. And I think a lot of times where this becomes an issue is for people who have kids with, more severe disabilities and needs. And that's where that struggle really comes in. But anyway, that is what is going on with that. That's what we know about it now. And we will, of course, continue to report on it. Okay, let's look ahead to the coming week. We do have the Knox County budget vote Monday at 5 p.m. That's a special called meeting of County Commission. The only things that are on the agenda have to do with the budget. At the front end of the meeting, they're going to have their final public hearing on it. So if you have any thoughts, concerns, criticisms, or you just want to say, hey, we love this is great, that's your opportunity right at the start of that meeting, 5 o'clock Monday in the main assembly room, City County building. At the same time, actually, as that meeting on Monday, and I'm going to cover both of these meetings somehow, the school board will be having its monthly work session where they will be talking about, like I said, they're going to get that initial report from some of the study work of the special education task force. They'll also be talking about items on the agenda for their Thursday monthly meeting. Both of those meetings will be in the boardroom at Summer Place. And a couple of interesting things on that monthly agenda. The biggest one is something that we have talked about here, this new policy they're developing to allow, speaking of special services, to allow private practitioners, providers of various kinds of therapies who are paid for by parents to come into classrooms and provide those kinds of services, especially having to do with students with autism being able to have applied behavior analysis provided to them by behavior specialists in the classroom. So they'll be talking about that. And then also Thursday, the Planning Commission is meeting.
Yeah, the Planning Commission is meeting Thursday for their monthly session. Obviously there are always tons of rezoning requests and things like that, and some of those are more controversial than others. I was kind of looking at the preliminary agenda for next week, and things are happening in North Knoxville, and inside the 640 Beltway, North Knoxville. And I am of the firm belief that the establishment almost 5 years ago of the global headquarters of Compass has spurred all this economic development in North Knoxville. I think that's kind of an overlooked factor in many people's minds.
Yeah, I think it's done nothing but make North Knoxville more attractive to people.
But there are several things. One of them is, of course, the city's been putting a lot of emphasis on increasing density, and there are 3 developments. Looks like they'll range from a duplex or 2 to a large apartment complex. But they would increase density in some neighborhoods. One's in Hoyt Avenue, which is in Belmorris. Another's on Chickamauga Avenue, which is in Oakwood Lincoln Park, and yet another one over on Valley View, which is the Whittle Springs area near the golf course there. So some increased density would be coming in there if these rezonings get approved. There's also I'm not sure how long it's been abandoned, but an abandoned gas station on Whittle Springs Road.
Mm-hmm. I know it well.
Yes, it's over near La Esperanza, which is taqueria in the neighborhood.
Compass endorsed taqueria.
Yeah. And they're not even sponsoring us. We're just saying, hey, it's good. It's good. We go there. But anyway, this former gas station is apparently going to be revived and turned into a functioning gas station, pending approval, and they're seeking approval from the Planning Commission. And one other thing that's coming up is a developer wants to open a cookout restaurant on Broadway at the corner of Edgewood and Broadway, which is basically halfway between the twin towers of the Compass Empire.
It's also the fast food mecca of North Knoxville there. Yeah. I was going to say, right, Cookout is the one thing we don't have there, because you got Crystal, McDonald's, Burger King, there's a Wendy's,
Bojangles.
Bojangles, yeah.
This would be essentially between the Burger King and Kentucky Fried Chicken. So,
well, my kids, I have to say, are huge fans of Cookout, and so particularly their shakes, and so they will be happy to hear this.
Not so fast, though. One of the things, the reason this is coming to the Planning Commission is they're wanting a drive-through. Now, one of the points of emphasis that the city council's made through its zoning regulations is that areas like the Broadway corridor in that section of the city are to be pedestrian friendly, and they're really pushing that that all developments in those new developments in those corridors be pedestrian friendly when they located the buildings close to the front of the lot, parking in the rear, and really de-emphasizing the automobile and make it more of a walkable community. And the request is for a drive-through. I mean, that's what it's really kind of. I wouldn't say it's incompatible, but it is at odds with, in many ways, with kind of the thrust of the city's desire for greater density and greater walkability. 2 weeks ago there was the city council wrestled with a drive-through at a similar spot on Kingston Pike in Bearden, right in front of Bearden Elementary School. And so there was another request for a drive-through there, a Taco Bell, and they wrestled with it. There was a lot of opposition to it. Not sure how much opposition there will actually be here, but there's a lot of opposition to that one, and they ended up approving it. But it was, it's one of those things that one of those sticky land use things, because there is the desire for greater walkability and less of a reliance on automobiles and more, especially toward the center of the city, more of an urban development. And nothing says, well, I don't say nothing says, but very few things say suburban development as much as a drive-through does.
Yeah,
and that you balance that though against things like there are kids in the community who would love to have a cookout there and have,
right.
and it would, it would generate more revenue from, based on what's at the location now, and, could encourage other developments along along Broadway. I mean, Broadway's one of those. It's one of those things where there is a large density there, and it can support lots of businesses there, although it's been kind of underdeveloped as far as amenities that would really attract a lot of people. There are a lot of payday loan places and things like that. So that's one of the sticky wickets that the Planning Commission is going to look at this week.
Yeah, that'll be interesting. Yeah, I can say from my extensive experience with our local cookouts, I know that cookout is a drive-through only model. I mean, they don't even there is no indoors at cookout that you can go into, and even building a cookout that allowed for pedestrian access wouldn't really get you anything, because you can walk up. Even if you could walk up to the cookout, it's not like there's a walk-up window. There's a drive-through window. That's basically all it is.
Yeah. Well, you could have picnic tables out.
They do have the one on Kingston Pike does have some small tables outside, but it's basically just a drive-through.
Yeah.
I'd worked for Cookout for a little while. They do have a couple with dining rooms in town, but they are built around their drive-through. That's all they care about. There are a couple Cookout's built on a couple guys that were Wendy's franchisees that when they left, they sold all their Wendy's franchises to start Cookout as a direct competitor with them, and that's their whole thing. That's why you see them popping up right next to a lot of Wendy's. Mm-hmm. So Cookout's it's an interesting company, but they know how to move some product though.
Well, and I do think that just going to the drive-through thing, I mean, I feel like that's a direction that fast food in general has moved toward. Even places that do still have interior dining, for the most part, you'll see huge lines of cars around the Taco Bell or the Burger King or whatever, and maybe one or two people inside. Most of their business already is drive-through. Right,
and a whole section of the parking lot's got the order ahead on the app thing, so you could skip the drive-through, but you still don't have to go inside either.
Right. Yeah. I think that the pandemic exacerbated that or accelerated that, I should say,
for sure. All right. Well, all that and more to come next week. We will talk about all of those things on next week's podcast, and as a special sort of treat next week, all of us are going to take a Delta 8 gummy 1 hour before we do the taping. So, no, we're not really going.
That'll be provided by eVape.
But we could legally. Seth would probably be happy to
absolutely to
bring the goods for
our
us.
Human Resources Department might frown on it.
Right.
Or
Okay.
not. Well, who knows.
I think that's all for this week.
That is all for this week. Yeah.
All right. Well, we will see you all next week. Hope you are have had a good weekend.
Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And many thanks to William Wright for composing our theme song. Compass Points is a partnership of Barking Shark Media and Barbarian Productions, and recorded by Lord Seth A. Barber at Barbarian Studios, Knoxville, Tennessee.